From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, theZoomer, hosted by Marissa Lennox.
Welcome to theZoomer. I'm Marissa Lennox. Last week, Ontario Premier Doug Ford announced that beer and wine will be hitting corner stores and grocery stores across the province starting this September. This move, which comes earlier than originally promised, is stirring up some debate, especially considering an existing 10-year agreement with the conglomerates that own the beer store. This agreement, set to expire in December 2025, grants exclusive right to sell 12 and 24 packs of beer, among other things. However, the PC government has opted to speed up the timeline at a cost of $225 million, but breaking the stronghold of a long-standing monopoly. So what's the rationale? Why the rush? Could this decision be signaling a possible snap election? And what about the potential trade-offs with more immediate societal needs like healthcare? We begin with Finance Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy to get some answers. Minister, it's good to have you on the program. Thank you for taking the time.
Happy to be with you.
All right, so set the table for us. Why is it so important to end this monopoly?
Well, this is a tremendous opportunity to open up to small businesses, to employees, to people right across the province to have more convenience and choice. You know, we had a framework in place for 97 years, and of course, the really terrible 10-year monopoly deal signed by the Liberal government really restricted the province from moving forward. So this is an opportunity for economic growth, an opportunity for 8,000 points of sale right across the province. It's an opportunity for more jobs. It's an economic job creator, and it ultimately gives consumers choice and convenience and competition, and we're treating Ontarians like adults finally after 97 years.
All right, but why the hurry? And at a cost of $225 million, could that money not be better spent elsewhere? Because I would think that many Ontarians might be willing to wait until next year for that contract to expire.
Well, it's not either or. I mean, we're making the investments in healthcare, education, social services. We're rebuilding the economy. We're making massive investments, record investments in infrastructure, 190 billion capital plan, building schools, hospitals, subways, roads. You're seeing it right across the province, and so it's not an either or; it's an and so we're making those investments. But Let's take a look at the restrictive sale of alcohol that's participated in this province for so long. We made the announcement in December that we reached an agreement to end the Master Framework Agreement, and this is just a continuation of that. So it was just a matter of time that this deal was going to fall apart, and it did. And under our watch, we made a commitment to the people of Ontario in the election of 2018 and again in 2022 to get it done, and this is what the people of Ontario want us to do.
Now, the Ontario Liberals are claiming that the actual costs will be around $1 billion. Why is she saying that, and is that plausible? Of course, she cites things like lost revenue in licensing fees and in rebates. Were those figures omitted from your calculation?
You know, Bonnie Crombie's just making up those numbers. Those are, made up numbers. The only way you can get to those numbers, frankly, is if she would increase costs and revenue, taxes and fees on the small businesses and on consumers. And so that's the only way you can get to those numbers. You know, you got to pick a lane. You're either for high taxes and high fees, or you're like our government, who believes in lower taxes and lower fees, not putting it on the burden of small businesses, not putting it on the burden of consumers. We're allowing them to compete now in the business world for points of sale, for distribution, for getting the product delivered. This is going to be fantastic for Ontario-made product, craft brewers, craft wineries. They've all sung the praises of moving forward. They've been lobbying for 20 years to get the shackles off the terrible deal that the Liberals signed. So, we're just following through on a commitment made to the people of Ontario.
Is the intention for the beer store to completely withdraw?
The beer store has lots of opportunity here because they will be continue to distribute to now many more points of sale. That's a business opportunity. They're going to have a role in recycling. So this is an opportunity for the beer store. Of course, the beer store retail portion of it will transition. And that's where the money that you referenced earlier, the up to $225 million, is actually going to transition those stores and protect jobs as we make this transition. So I think the beer store has an opportunity here, and many others have an opportunity. This is growing the pie. in Ontario, as opposed to just restricting it for one small group that the previous Liberal government did with their terrible 10-year monopoly deal that they imposed on the people of Ontario.
Now, how much, I've seen some reports, some analysts say that the price of alcohol could go up by as much as 20 to even 40% in convenience stores and in box stores. How much latitude will these stores have in terms of pricing, and will the government intervene in any way, or will you allow the market to dictate?
We're going to allow the market to dictate, with the caveat there is a floor on the price of alcohol, so that there is limits to how much they can compete and discount. But you can see a range of business models taking hold here, to the large big box stores where they compete on volume, to the convenience store who, it's maybe 500 feet or 100 feet from where you're walking to be able to pick up your favorite beverage. So I think the market will play the role in deciding what the price should be. What we've really done here is allowed the market to compete. And that's what the market has been asking for. And when I say the market, the craft wineries, the Ontario craft brewers, the convenience stores, the independent grocers, so on and so forth, this is what they've been asking for decades. And, I think that we set it up so that consumers will be the big winners, workers will be winners, and small businesses will be winners.
Minister, just finally, you mentioned earlier that the government can walk and chew at the same time, and while I appreciate that, I'd be remiss to not ask about criticism that there is a real disparity in priorities here. You've got a healthcare system that's on its knees, a family doctor shortage, a nursing shortage, and you're spending $225 million to end a contract that you could wait 16 months and not have to spend. So how do you respond to criticism that the priorities are skewed?
Well, like I said, you can do both. And let's look at the healthcare budget, for example, the largest healthcare budget in the history of the province, grown by over $10 billion over the last 2 years at about 6%. Massive investment in hospital builds, over $50 billion for hospital builds. Recruiting of nurses, the largest in the country. Some 30,000 nurses are now in the pipeline after 80,000 have been brought into the system since we took office. Over 12,500 doctors, new medical schools, primary care models being rolled out across the province to connect more people to primary care. So there's a lot of things that are happening at the same time. We have an investment and overall in the province of $200 billion, of which healthcare is the largest amount. We've seen expenditures, investments in education as well, and social services to support the most vulnerable. So I believe that through focusing on economic prosperity, infrastructure, investments in healthcare, education, social services, you can do all of these things. And our government is demonstrating very successfully, I think, that we can do these things without excluding one or the other.
Okay, Minister. Well, thank you for your time and all of the best.
My pleasure.
On the other side, we'll get perspective from an Ontario craft brewer. That's next. Welcome back. Continuing our discussion, Justin Bélanger is the co-owner of Storm Stayed Craft Brewing Co. Justin, it's good to have you on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Before the break, you might have heard the finance minister say that craft brewers have been lobbying for this for 20 years and are essentially overjoyed. As a craft brewer, how do you assess what the government has done as far as expanding access to alcohol in Ontario?
Well, we are looking forward to having new avenues to sell our beer. We're not really seeing it as the big gain that the minister is saying that it will be.
Why is that?
For us to get into different corner stores or convenience stores or grocery stores, we're going to be competing against known brands, which unfortunately with our different price points that we have to sell at, we're afraid that our products are just going to be languishing on the shelves.
Okay, we'll get to pricing in a moment. What has historically been the issue between craft brewers and the beer store?
The issue that we've had with the beer store is it is a pay-to-play game. And unfortunately, as a small producer, we can't afford the beer store.
Is your beer in the beer store currently?
It's currently not in the beer store, no.
Now, it's my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but brewers, these small brewers, will not have to pay the same levy to be in a convenience store as they do in the beer store. So would that not be a good thing?
The issue that we're going to have going into the beer store, while it has a bigger demographic than the convenience store, is going to be distribution. So right now, going to LCBOs, or if we were to go to grocery stores and a beer store, we currently go to 12 different LCBOs within this city. We could go to 16 beer stores and to maybe 20 different grocery stores. But if we were to go to every convenience store, we're looking at 200 to 300 different convenience stores just within London. So that would drastically increase our cost of distribution, and which would have to be added on to the final cost of the product.
Cost of distribution, I see. And you're also concerned that convenience stores will charge a premium because, after all, you pay for convenience and you won't be able to compete. Is it just trying to understand what your concern is? Is that right?
So there's that. So one of the things is whenever we sell our beer to the LCBO, we don't have to pay part of the taxes that we do to our regular product out of our door, which means that we can have a set price. If we were to sell to convenience stores, we are fully taxed on that product. So we're looking at another 50 to 75 cents per product, in addition to what we're already selling at the LCBO. If we don't participate with this program, then we lose eyes on our product. And then that would hurt the sales of our product, because then people will just see the domestics instead of our own beer.
Okay, so what would you like to see then from the government? Is there anything that the government can do that would be beneficial to you as a craft brewer?
So we're not opposed to opening up these different channels of operations. We just want people to realize that the pricing will be significantly different at these different places.
Okay, Justin, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you and all the best.
Thank you for having me.
Stick around for our panel discussion coming up next. Welcome back. Let's bring in our panel now, both remote and in studio, to continue our discussion on what it'll mean for Ontario now that alcohol will soon be available in every convenience, grocery, and big box store. Welcome to you all. Thank you for being here. Grant, I'll begin with you because you are someone that has championed this fight for many years. You started a campaign called Free My Booze. How does it feel now that your efforts have paid off?
I guess it feels like a big weight's been lifted for me. I launched this campaign in 2015 just out of boredom and frustration. And to be seeing it come to fruition after 9 years is a relief for me personally, even though I personally barely drink anymore.
You know, Brian, this is something that the government promised and said that they would do, but it's also an issue that has been around for 39 years and 7 premiers.
So I think the first time I remember someone promising it would have been David Peterson.
That's right.
When he was running to be premier. That was in 85 or 87. I don't know which campaign he promised it on. Mike Harris promised it. It's been promised multiple times since. This is the first time there's actually been action, and it brings Ontario in line with most other provinces in one way, shape, or form. So it's not a radical departure like most people think. And, over the weekend, we keep hearing, we can't have beer and wine in convenience stores. Well, I was out in rural Ontario on the weekend. Guess what they have? Beer and wine in corner stores, including gas stations. Mm-hmm. So it's, for much of the province, there won't be a big change. For urban dwellers, maybe a bigger change.
Already we've seen beer and wine in convenience stores, and I guess the concern is that it'll increase 8-fold. But how do you view what the government's done?
So consider what happened in other countries. When other countries expanded the number of retail stores in which it was available, for example, Australia, use didn't just go up, it went way up. So the bigger problem is that we are doing this at a time that Canada cannot afford and does not have the cushioning to manage the extra medical complications that will occur from it.
Can we definitively say that? Is there empirical data that does say if you increase ease of access, consumption will go up?
I can say that unequivocally that it will. The more convenient it is to access, the more the use will go up. And the problem is that if you look at alcohol use disorder, it now affects 1 in 5 Canadians. 5% of Canadians actually get therapy for it. So 1 in 5 Canadians actually have alcohol use disorder, at least meeting the definition of mild. And when I say use disorder, that does imply addiction. And addiction is, I can't stop using it even though I know it causes harms. I use it and I need more of it to get the same effect. So let's not delude ourselves. The World Health Organization says the amount of safe alcohol is zero. Canada's guidelines are 2 drinks or less per week. So when it's expanded, its use will go up.
Adam, do you share these same concerns?
In a general sense, yes. When the availability has gone up around the world, in Canada, for example, Alberta, or in BC, where I live, I'm calling from Victoria, we went through a partial privatization of retail sales in the early 2000s. Use and related harms have tended to go up. That hasn't always been the case, but I would say the balance of the evidence will show that alcohol sales, alcohol use will go up upon privatization. Now, those studies look at relatively small changes in availability. There's never really been anything like the large increase in availability that Ontario is undergoing, the kind of 10-fold type of increase from 1,100 stores to nearly 10,000. That's a different beast. So it's difficult to say how large the increase will be because it's kind of unprecedented, the size of the increase in availability all at once. From a public health and well-being standpoint, some caution could be exercised just in the way that it's rolled out, that how quickly the availability is allowed to increase, which is kind of up to us as the people through our governments, and so that's something that we could consider. But in a general sense, likely alcohol use and sales will increase because of the size of the increase in availability.
Okay, and I want to bring Catherine in here. Generally, just what your thoughts are as well, Catherine, just in light of everything that's been discussed so far.
Well, for one thing, the craft brewer that was speaking earlier, there's an awful lot of small businesses that are doing very well in small wineries, small craft breweries, and so on. And that's a very growing and important part of our economy. So the notion of having their distribution restricted so badly, and the LCBO has been terrible to these small players in the market. They require all kinds of money to have your product on the shelf and so on. So the LCBO has not done these people any favors at all. And then, of course, you have the small businesses like the convenience stores and other type of outlets that will have a new opportunity to sell alcohol. And I don't know. I mean, I can't believe that the drinking gets so very much worse, because you look at Europe. I mean, Europe has had this availability way more open than this forever, for as long as I can remember. I don't know that they have a worse alcohol problem there than we do. Why Ontario has been so prudish really up till now. And the notion of signing a 10-year agreement with the beer store, because that's the real, to my way of thinking, the real negative here is how much money it's going to cost the taxpayer. And we've heard 200 odd million. Some people have said, oh no, it's going to cost much more than that. We don't really know what the real number is yet. But that's a lot of money. And to move this ahead by 1 year, which is because the agreement would have expired next year anyway. There's been talk about maybe the Ford government is going to have an early election and so on, and maybe that's true. But I don't understand why we have to pay so much money to get out of this ridiculous agreement that Kathleen Wynne should never have signed for such a long period as 10 years.
All right, you've raised a lot of points, which we will unpack after the break. So hold that thought, and we'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back. More than a dozen health organizations, including Ontario's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Kieran Moore, are urging the province to create a comprehensive alcohol strategy. They point out that alcohol leads to thousands of deaths and hundreds of thousands of hospital admissions each year. In response, the government has promised $10 million for public health and social responsibility programs as part of its 10-year, $3.8 billion mental health plan. But is that enough? Dr. Sherk, I'll begin with you on that.
Alcohol is responsible for a lot of different health conditions and diseases. It likely will not be enough to cover any kind of added alcohol-caused harms that come out of this change. 10 million is reasonably small compared to the kind of the overall healthcare costs that alcohol is responsible for in Ontario. I do that work for Canada, and it's around $2.3 billion. So, to say that another way, alcohol is responsible for about $2.3 billion in healthcare costs every year in Ontario, and that number is larger in Canada-wide, about $6.4 billion. So the scale of these numbers is quite large. 10 million likely won't be enough to cover, any added.
Dr. Sherk, where are those numbers coming from? Is that from hospital costs, drunk drive? Where do those, the justice system, where do those numbers come from?
Sure, yeah. I do this work that is around Canada's alcohol deficit. And what it does is it compares the government revenue from the sale of alcohol, things like the excise tax, like sales tax, and then any profit that the government retailers get. And then I'm also a lead researcher on a project called the Canadian Substance Use Harms and Costs Project. And that project is responsible for kind of tallying up the cost of substance use, including alcohol, Canada-wide. So we look at healthcare costs, like you were saying, Marissa. We also look at criminal justice costs that flow from alcohol and other substance use. And we look at economic loss of production when substance use causes death and disability and people have to miss work or are removed from the workforce because of death.
Over the last little while, more scientific evidence has come out about the harms of alcohol, even alcohol consumed in a moderate way. And I think, when we talk about what is a drink, the answer is not so simple, Dr. Gorfinkel.
No, it's actually complicated. So just to recap what Health Canada's suggestions were just last year, the updated ideas, World Health Organization says no alcohol is safe. The new guidelines are maximum of 2 drinks per week. What happens beyond that? The risk of all-cause mortality goes up. The chances of dying from pretty much anything. Blood pressure goes up. Cardiovascular risk skyrockets, including heart attacks and stroke risk. Let's call it out for what it is. It's a massive impact on anxiety and depressive disorders. And I will point out that the budget for that is the $3.8 billion, as you said, and they're offering a paltry, what did you say? Was it $10 million over 10 years? What is that, $1 million a year? The cost of one house in Toronto? I don't think so. That's not about to scratch the surface on what we're seeing. It doesn't even begin to move the needle. Let's call it out for what it is. It's insulting that this government, at this time, when family doctors are in such a lack right now, how dare they bring this in? 1 in 6 Ontarians do not have a family doctor to even go get their blood pressure checked. And in 2 years, that number is going to be 1 in 4. So let's own this for what it is. A big mistake, especially to bring it out this quickly.
That report that said you should have no more than 2 drinks per week or all of these bad things will happen to your health was nothing but bad science. I don't have it in front of me, but I went through looking at what they claimed were the increases. And they would say it's an 85% increase in this disease. And then you look and you say, well, next to nobody has that disease. This is not a major issue, but that's what they put at the front of it. It was a garbage report.
Are you kidding? Are you a physician?
No, I'm not, but I can read.
I can read. Okay, can you read what the World Health Organization said?
Okay, where do you stand on safe supply?
Okay, this is a separate topic. I'm not even going down that rabbit hole.
Where do you stand on safe supply?
We're talking about alcohol
we're handing out opioid pills to people.
Are you kidding? Alcohol
We're handing out
has serious
opioid
harms.
pills to people, and you're claiming that more than 2 glasses of wine a week is going to kill people. I'm sorry, opioid pills being handed out in the dozens.
We're not talking
kills
about
people.
Opioids right now. You're
talking about what's bad for people.
We're talking about alcohol.
No, don't sit there and defend safe supply.
With the facts?
Don't sit there and defend safe supply and then claim that more than 2 drinks a week will kill our health system.
Listen,
it doesn't work that way. You're an activist.
Let's bring in some other panelists.
And an activist.
Let's bring in some other panelists. Grant, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, my first thought is that Canada's been restricting these products tighter than basically anyone else in the world for almost 100 years. So my thought process says, have we created a space that has uniquely low cases of alcoholism, crime, and the like? I don't think so, right? Like, I don't think Canada is uniquely low in those regards. And then when we look across Canada, do we really think that alcoholism is dramatically worse in Quebec and Alberta and BC and Saskatchewan and Newfoundland? No. Like, I go out in those places and Canada is still largely the same. And we have, a dramatically reduced availability of these products here. And yet I don't see society functioning all that differently. So Canada's been a laggard in this, and Ontario's been a laggard behind everyone else for a very long time. And I'm excited to be treated like an adult in my province.
All right, let's pause here. There's more to discuss on the other side. Stick around. How about that, Catherine? Are there lessons we can learn from other places in the world that do this?
I'm sure there are, and I think education is valuable on anything. But I was just going to mention a very similar point, that are we saying government shouldn't permit us to do these things at all? Because that's really, the argument here. And I don't believe that's true. I want less government in my life. I want less government intervention. They should stick to their knitting. And I just don't think this is an issue that is naturally a government type of issue. I mean, we sell cigarettes. Granted, there are controls and whatnot on cigarettes. People still smoke, even though we know that's a zero tolerance of there's absolutely no good news on that front. So I think the bigger issue is, yes, why do we need government to regulate this? Adults, yes, some will get into trouble for sure with anything. And I just don't see why we have not moved in this direction with proper regulations for people under the legal age and that kind of thing, which the corner stores have proven they can do just fine with cigarettes.
We're asking retailers to pit public health against profit. So I don't think that's realistic.
Have you ever seen an LCBO shut down for selling to a minor?
I've seen the LCBO last year have 12 million challenges. And I wonder how many challenges will there be now?
Have they ever shut down a store?
It's LCBO. The information we have is limited.
Have they ever shut down a store?
I have no idea. So let me finish. Unlike the United States, Canada has a social contract with its population. And that social contract is we will provide health care to every man, woman, and child. The United States has no such contract. This is a denigration of that social contract because we are not servicing people adequately right now. People do not have access to primary care. I feel kind of sorry for you. You spent your last 15 years or whatever trying to get, booze on the shelves. Congratulations. But you have to look at yourself in the mirror every morning. I'm not sure how you do that. It's easy to stand here as a physician and say, we are doing our best to try to minimize the harm.
I hope you live a perfect life.
Not at all.
Well, you're moralizing to Grant here. You're moralizing to Grant and asking how he can look at himself in the mirror.
Yeah.
I think you should stop.
Grant, I'll get you to respond.
Yeah, I mean, look, the question of retailers putting profit ahead of public safety, I mean, I popped into a convenience store in Vermont probably 8 or 9 years ago. It was 12:01 a.m. And I was wondering if I could pick up a 6-pack of beer. And the guy looked at me and said, no, I can't do that. I was like, out of curiosity, why not? He said, if I get caught selling you a 6-pack of beer at 12:01 a.m., I will get fined $50,000 and I will have to shut down my business. He's like, my sales have to cut off at midnight. So I make sure that I don't sell anything after 11:55 because it is too big a risk to my business to do that. Right. So these retailers are going to have real repercussions to getting caught selling to minors, unlike the beer store and LCBO, to Brian's point, which frankly, like if they got caught, I don't think anything would happen to them. But these private businesses will have their license at risk, and that's a major threat to their business. Adam talked earlier about saying, we've never seen an increase of this magnitude before. In my lifetime, Alberta privatized in the 90s, and they had a similar increase in points of sale, and about 20 US states did as well. And when the Ontario government was considering this move in 2005, it did a review of those jurisdictions and if there was massive increase in social ills. And the Ontario government's review said, evidence is inconclusive. So, we've seen these massive increases in retail points before in the past in other jurisdictions, and there's been no demonstrable change.
Yeah, it's the magnitude or the size of the increase. So the 10-fold increase, I don't think that has been replicated elsewhere. For example, when Alberta fully privatized in 1993, it wasn't a change in magnitude quite of that size, from my understanding. I would like to go back and talk about something that we were on before, which was Canada's guidance on alcohol and health. And I feel that, so firstly, I'll correct something that Dr. Gorfinkel said. This report was released by my organization, by the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction, not by Health Canada, although Health Canada was the funder. And for Brian, I was an author of that report. So me and about 20 other people spent a long time. We spent 2 years of very detailed and dedicated work defining guidance around alcohol for Canadians and people in Canada. So I feel I need to defend it a bit because you were calling it garbage and that sort of thing. What we wanted to do was provide information for adults and everyone in Canada to have risk information around alcohol, because alcohol has been treated kind of different than other things that carry risk. And so presenting people with the risk information, it's not a demand, right? It's not a policy that people can only drink so much. It's simply advice. It's information that people may choose to use to modify their drinking if they want to. And so, I stand behind that guidance. I think it's excellent guidance. It was a world first the way that it was done. And so, I have no problem, putting my name behind that.
One of the other things that the government announced more recently is stiffer penalties for drunk drivers. Not an equal counterbalance, but it's another thing that they're doing to try and counteract this new policy to expand access, Dr. Gorfinkel.
Yeah, I'm deeply concerned about the potential for underage use of alcohol with a wide expansion and its effect on drunk driving. It's a serious issue. So with the increased use in alcohol that will come, with a nearly 10-fold increase in retail choices, we will see more drunk driving. I think we can all agree on that, right? If it's widely available and people are using more, we're going to see more harms related to alcohol, including the psychiatric harms, the physical harms, and of course the violence that comes with alcohol, including traffic accidents and underage use.
Brian, I'm going to give you the final word, and it seems like everyone's been wondering about whether or not this is some kind of an indication that the government will call an early election. And I stopped short of asking the finance minister that question because I figured he'd give me his politician's answer, which is a non-answer.
Trying to get Peter Bethlenfalvy to go off script is difficult. I do it on a regular basis.
What say you?
Look, I've heard as early as this August. That's not happening. There are claims that they're planning for an election next summer. Like most governments, this is not a government that plans that far out, because in government, it's difficult to do that. I always tell people, think less of West Wing and more of Veep when you want to know how governments operate. They're going day to day, crisis to crisis, and And so the idea that there's some grand plan that will announce alcohol expansion now and go to the polls in June 2025, that's not happening. I'm not saying that they won't go early. I think they'd be stupid to go early. I think they'd be punished by the voters for going early. But there's no plan in place at this point that I can see.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. When we come back, we'll get to some of your questions. That's next. Welcome back. Well, it's that time in the show when we turn it over to you, our audience, because your insights are always fascinating. And to kick us off, we've got George. Hey, George, what's your question?
Hello. Do you think there's a social responsibility in neighborhoods or beer distributors having a positive advertising campaign? Do you think that will help in decreasing the cost of the mental health care system?
So that's not a one-size-fits-all. So it depends on the person. So although 1 in 5 Canadians have alcohol use disorder, many of them don't want, don't seek, and even if they do want and seek, cannot get treatment. So 5% in Canada are treated. So it's vastly undertreated. And we're undereducating our medical students about that as well. So many don't realize that it can be treated with naloxone and with other, common drugs that are easily available, that are inexpensive. So it is a serious problem. A sign is not going to solve the problem for the people who suffer the most.
Okay, George, thank you for your question. The next, we've got a couple email questions, comes from Gail, and she writes this. What happened to Doug Ford's Buck a Beer promise?
Do you want to jump in there, Grant? I can give the political answer, but...
We'll get answers from both of you.
They brought it in. They allow producers to sell for as little as $1 a beer, but it is very difficult to produce at that level. And so for a while it was there, then it was just there on long weekends, and I can't remember the last time I saw anybody selling for that. This was something that smaller brewers like Lakeport really capitalized on in Ontario, and then the pressure from the big guys got so big that Dalton McGuinty outlawed Buck a Beer. So it was political when they got rid of it, was political when they brought it back. Now it's economics keeping it out.
And granted, based on my discussion with Justin Bélanger earlier, it just seems like it's not feasible financially for a lot of brewers.
Yeah, no, it's not. Brian's comments were well put. So I encouraged the government to do Buck a Beer. It was in some of my policy briefs that I wrote and sent to the ministers and to the campaign teams over the years. And my direction to them was, you should introduce Buck a Beer because price floors are regressive, right? No one really changes their beer consumption too much based on, no one's going to say I normally drink this premium brand, but I'm going to buy this garbage because it's $1, right? But they are regressive in that, a lot of poor people drink cheaper beer, and the government kept increasing the price floor year after year, making it more and more expensive for people to go and buy beer. So I said, you should drop the floor down to $1, but you shouldn't make a big political deal about it because nobody is going to sell beer for $1. That was what I told them. I said, don't make a big campaign promise about it. Don't do all this stuff, but you should drop the price floor down to $1.
I can only shake my head when I hear this. I can't help myself. It's just so offensive. At a time that Canada is on its knees, patients do not have access to health care. Here we are encouraging a Buck a Beer. Is this for real? So the people who are at the most risk, I will point out, maybe these are people you've personally never met. Do you think if it were really $1, what would happen to those with alcohol use disorder? It would skyrocket. It would vastly increase their use. And that would vastly denigrate further Canada's social contract to provide health care for every man, woman, and child.
So we should increase the minimum price of beer to what, $6 a beer, and make it so that the alcoholics are all
I'm not
poor.
going to the top price. I'm talking about making it as cheap as possible for people to access. because the problem
I think
is that it
people
will increase use as well. Like, let's be honest about it.
I don't think we should artificially inflate the price of beer to make it so that people buying a discount product who are probably worse off economically have to spend a greater percentage of their income.
Okay. We do the same thing with cigarettes, right? So cigarettes are far more expensive, and that has a massive impact on its utilization.
And we give out opioids for free.
Opioids, we're not even talking about. I'm just trying to.
Well, you just brought in cigarettes. You just brought in cigarettes.
I'm mentioning it because addictions, if we make it more widely available, if we lower the price, both of those increase the use, and both will denigrate Canada's social contract to provide health care for people.
Ultimately, there are major philosophical differences on this panel, but we will have
and
to.
Marissa, if I could.
Go ahead, Adam.
If I could just jump in a little bit, I'd like to talk about something that's actually really quite an important policy decision, which is the floor price of alcohol, that kind of minimum price below which alcohol can't be sold. So that actually is quite effective at reducing harm. So for example, if we look at a country like Scotland, like Wales, those countries have implemented what's called a minimum unit price, a floor price on alcohol, and they've raised that up a little bit. And so that has quite a big kind of equity producing component. The people that are drinking the most and the people that have a little bit less money to, spend on alcohol, those people experience the biggest health benefit. So they keep drinking they keep spending around the same amount on alcohol, but they drink a little bit less. And that's kind of the purpose of those policies. Now, from a public health standpoint, it wouldn't be advisable to increase that price to like fixed dollars. But, from a health standpoint, it would be reasonable to have a floor price that's a little bit higher than $1. And that policy is really critically important. It also, if we can think about kind of the people that are experiencing alcohol use disorder, there are those of us that are experiencing that right now, but then there are many more of us who will experience that in future. And setting a floor price decreases the number of us that will experience alcohol use disorder in future. It's a longitudinal or future forward policy instead of just thinking about the here and now. And so that was something I wanted to weigh in on because that floor price is a really critical kind of policy avenue that governments could go if they chose.
Okay, Dr. Sherk, and to my panel, we'll have to leave it there. We hope we've given you a lot to consider this evening. To get in touch, you can send us an email at comments@thezoomer.com. As always, a big thank you to my panel and to you at home. We'll see you soon. For now, it's time to zoom out.